Welcome to Stress and Heal. Take a deep breath and let the noise fade away. It's time for a quiet story, just for you. Why did 18th century Quakers walk in silence after dinner? Hey guys, tonight we're going back in time. Way back. Imagine it's a dusky evening in Pennsylvania, sometime in the mid 1700s. The air smells of damp earth and wood smoke. Crickets are starting their nightly chorus, and the sun is slipping behind a thick grove of chestnut trees. You're wearing itchy wool clothes, your boots are muddy, and your dinner was, well, practical. Probably some root vegetable stew. And just when you think it's time to collapse into bed, someone quietly nods to the path beyond the trees. No words, just a look. And so you go. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along behind the others, feet muffled in the packed dirt. There's a chill that settles over your shoulders, but nobody complains. Nobody says anything at all. Because this is a silent walk, a ritual. Every evening after the communal meal, everyone in this small Quaker settlement walks into the forest, not to talk, not to gossip, but to listen. Not to nature, though that's part of it, but to something deeper. Some call it the inner light. Some just call it quiet. At first, it's awkward. You're used to filling silences. Your brain keeps throwing out questions. Is this it? Are we just walking? Is there a bear behind me? But then something shifts. The rhythm of your feet syncs with your breath. Your eyes stop darting and start absorbing. The way moonlight spills between branches. The sound of leaves whispering as something small scurries away. The smell of moss and the slight saltiness of your own sweat. Historians still argue whether these walks were formalized religious practice or just a happy side effect of a quieter life. But either way, they mattered. To Quakers, silence wasn't emptiness. It was the container that made reflection possible. And there's a reason for that. Once upon a time, in this young, chaotic American colony, the world was loud in all the wrong ways. Muskets, sermons, shouting politics. The Quakers, or the Religious Society of Friends, were different. They didn't shout their truth. They waited for it to whisper. Every evening, after the day's labor, plowing fields, stitching clothes, making soap by hand, try not to romanticize that one too hard, they'd sit down to eat, and then without being told, the community would rise. Some in twos, others alone. No call, no bell, just a knowing. You feel it too, in your bones now. That subtle tug that says, go walk. And so you do. You pass the miller, his hands still dusty with flour. A boy with freckles steps aside for a moment to tie a broken shoelace. A grandmother leans gently on her daughter's arm, not to talk, but simply to move forward together. There's no trail markers, no signs, no assigned length. Some loop back after a few minutes. Others disappear into the trees for hours. The point isn't exercise, it's exhale. One fringe theory says these evening walks were also tactical, a way to check on neighbors quietly, to make sure no one was ill or brooding too long alone. Kind of like a stealthy wellness patrol in bonnets and boots. You wouldn't know it unless you knew the pattern, the people, the pauses in their step. And if you're thinking, why didn't they just talk over dinner like normal people? Well, you're forgetting. Quakers weren't huge on normal. They believed the divine spoke clearest not in shouts or even scripture, but in stillness. And not just in church, anywhere, in your own gut, in the rustle of leaves. Even in that split second when a hawk's shadow glides over you and makes you look up for the first time in hours. You slow your pace now. Not because you're tired, but because something about this silence feels weighted. Like it's holding more than just quiet. It's holding stories, questions, ache. Maybe even a kind of shared grief. You glance at the man beside you, his hands clasped behind his back, head slightly bowed. Is he praying? Mourning? Just digesting too much cabbage? You'll never know. And that's the point. The silence is a boundary, but also an invitation. Every day, life was simple. Chores, prayer, trade. But beneath that simplicity lived pressure, religious tension, colonial threats, personal doubt. The world around this tiny settlement didn't understand them. Quakers refused violence, refused war, refused social hierarchy. They talked to native tribes with respect, not muskets. That earned them some strange looks, sometimes worse. So, in a time when chaos was constant, when tomorrow was never guaranteed, walking together in silence became a kind of rebellion, a statement. We are not rushing. We are not shouting. We are listening. And somehow, centuries later, here you are, following the same trail, breathing the same air, wondering, as they must have done, whether the world outside the trees could ever be quiet enough to heal. Your feet crunch slowly over fallen pine needles. The forest is darker now, but not frightening. The moon has your back. And even though no one says a word, you feel a connection to the people around you, stronger than words could carry. Maybe it's time we all stole this idea back. Sure, your neighbors would probably call the cops if you silently marched down the street in a hood after dinner every night. But there's something in the structure of it that could fit, even now. Maybe you don't need to walk. Maybe it's sitting on the porch without your phone, staring at a candle, letting your brain do the one thing it never gets to anymore: pause. Of course, your brain hates that at first. It wants to scroll, to check if it's missed something. It wants that little electric hit of noise. But the silence? It offers nothing, just space, which is exactly what makes it terrifying and sacred. And so you walk on, the end of the path just ahead, though no one told you when to stop. That's the thing about quiet. It doesn't demand, it just invites. Here is your passage exactly as written, with no changes. Darkness has now blanketed the forest, and your eyes begin to adjust to the dim light. You realize that the less you see clearly, the more you hear. The chirping of crickets becomes crisp, almost like a deliberate symphony. The rustling leaves overhead sound like the sigh of some great sleeping creature. And each of your footsteps, no matter how careful, makes a small but unavoidable sound. You think of the Quakers who once walked this same path before you. They had no therapy apps, no healing meditation podcasts, no decaf coffee, just calloused hands, steadfast hearts, and the bold belief that silence is enough. Every day, their lives followed a steady rhythm. You rose with the sun, worked until it set, ate simply, then walked. No electric lights, no car horns, no texts popping up at 2 a.m. A part of you feels jealous, doesn't it? But another part wonders, were they running away? Probably not. The Quakers didn't avoid the world, they lived right in the middle of it. But they chose not to let the world shape their inner lives. They believed that within every person was an inner light, a divine spark from God, needing no priest, no pulpit, no preaching. Simple, and yet dangerous for its time. And here's the key. They didn't just believe that in church. They lived it in everything, from how they did business, paying women fairly, even back then, to how they treated enslaved people. They were among the first abolitionists, to how they raised their kids. You know what counted as weird back then? Talking to children gently instead of hitting them. Wild, right? But one of the quietest, most consistent practices happened each evening: the after dinner walk. This simple act slowly became the spiritual spine of their community. It was like a collective whisper saying, we're still here, we're still listening, and most of all, we're still learning how to slow down. Of course, not everyone loved it. Kids, for example, were less than thrilled. Picture some messy-haired boy trying to hide a sigh as his mother drags him out the door. You were probably that kid once. But as you get older, you begin to understand. It's not about not talking, it's about learning to hear yourself. One curious little detail: Quakers rarely had loud funerals, no wailing, no long eulogies, just sitting together in silence. Some might stand and share a memory, but only if they truly felt moved. And that reached deeper than any speech ever could. Some historians argue that it was during those long silences that many Quakers found the courage to act. From Harriet Tubman, who sought support from Quaker communities for the Underground Railroad, to Lucretia Mott, the women's rights activist who began her fight after a 3-hour quiet meeting. Not after a heated debate, after silence. And now, as you take a few more steps into this gentle night, you begin to realize something. Healing doesn't always come from advice. Sometimes it comes from sitting still long enough to hear the question you've been avoiding. What are you running from? What are you holding back? In silence, there's no one left to blame, no shortcuts, no maybe tomorrow. Just you, your breath, and the questions still unanswered. Silence forces you to face yourself, and that's either a gift or a challenge. Depends on the night. Here's a little known theory. Some say the Quakers walked not just for spiritual reasons, but for digestion. They ate early, and a light walk helped settle the stomach. So hey, now you've got a new reason to take an after-dinner stroll, not for enlightenment, but to avoid acid reflux. But like all repeated actions, it became a lifestyle. And from there, a ritual. There's something about knowing you're not the only one in the silence that makes loneliness dissolve. You might not know the person walking beside you, but you know they're trying to find peace, just like you. And then, without anyone checking their watch, without a signal or a word, you and the others all turn back at the same time. No explanation, no reminder. As if everyone's body had learned, that's enough. We've listened enough for today. Time to go home. You retrace your steps, passing the same places, but this time, everything feels different. The night is deeper, your heart beats slower, and your mind is far quieter. You can't explain it, but it feels like something inside you just gently clicked back into place. Not fully fixed, but no longer drifting. You can't quite put it into words, but you know it's real. And you begin to understand. This silence isn't an end. It's a beginning, a space to listen before you speak again, a pause between chapters. And you, quietly, are learning how to write your next one from there. Here is your passage exactly as written, with no changes. You wake to the sound of early bird song, but it doesn't feel like waking. Not in the usual sense. It feels more like surfacing from a deep pool, not startled, just lifted. Morning in the 18th century countryside doesn't come with alarms or caffeine. It drips in slowly like honey on warm bread. You stretch, figuratively and literally, and resume your walk. There's no one here to check your schedule. The only task ahead is to keep placing one foot in front of the other, through dew-kissed grass and past trees so old they've probably seen a few Quakers themselves, trudging along in wide-brimmed hats, deep in thought or not thinking at all. It makes you wonder, what did they think about during those walks? Not just yesterday's wheat harvest or who borrowed whose butter churn. No, something deeper was happening beneath those plain wool coats. Some Quakers kept journals, and through those entries, we catch glimpses. Confessions of doubt, joy, anger, even boredom. There was no pressure to appear holy. That's the odd thing. For people so religious, they didn't obsess over appearing perfect. They wanted honesty, even in silence. Every day, they walked the line between activism and introspection. It wasn't either or. That's the part we forget in modern life. You scroll past so many self-care memes that say protect your peace, but peace is not passive. The Quakers knew that. They protected their peace by challenging injustice. You pause for a moment near an old stone fence, lichen-covered, cracked with age. Maybe a Quaker sat here like you a few hundred years ago, catching their breath and wondering what the point of all this was. Maybe that person also wrestled with a restless heart. Because yes, spoiler alert, walking in silence didn't magically cure all their problems. Surprise. They were human. There's an ongoing historical debate about whether these evening and morning walks were part of a deeper meditative structure or just a habit that happened to help. Some scholars insist the Quakers planned their walks to align with spiritual listening sessions. Others argue, nah, they just needed to get out of the house after dinner with 10 kids and no Netflix. Maybe it's both. Maybe what matters isn't the intention, but the effect. And here's the real twist. Those silent walks gave birth to actions. Political, social, deeply controversial actions. Like refusing to take off their hats for British royalty. That sounds small until you realize it was the 1700s, and hat etiquette was serious business. Not bowing to a duke? That's like refusing to stand for the national anthem at a playoff game today, only riskier. Or refusing to pay war taxes. That could get you fined, imprisoned, or worse. But the Quakers did it anyway. Why? Because their silent walks, their quiet listening, had rooted them in a sense of right and wrong that wasn't swayed by noise or threat. You think about all the noise in your own life, buzzing, beeping, opinions stacked like Jenga blocks. You wonder what it would be like to sit still long enough to hear something truer. And now, as the sun edges higher, you begin to see more clearly, not just the trail ahead, but the parallels. Your need for silence isn't a retreat, it's a preparation. The world isn't going to stop shouting, but you don't have to shout back. A breeze stirs through the leaves, and you take that as your cue to keep walking. Not because you're chasing anything, but because moving forward, gently, quietly, is still progress. And then, as the trees part and a clearing opens ahead, you step into a light that feels earned, not gifted, not stolen, just slowly uncovered, like something you forgot was always there. You breathe it in. This is why they walked. Not for fitness or dogma or to prove anything, but to stay in rhythm with something bigger, something that doesn't speak in words but still says everything. Here is your passage exactly as written, with no changes. The afternoon sun pours warmly over the fields as your steps carry you onward, deeper into the quiet world the Quakers cherished. You notice how the light filters through the leaves in patches, creating a natural mosaic on the dusty path. It's almost as if the earth itself is breathing slowly, holding a secret that only the silent walkers could hear. You feel the gentle crunch of gravel beneath your boots and the occasional rustle of a bird startled by your presence. In these moments, you realize how rare it is to simply be without rushing or needing to perform. The Quakers' silent walks weren't just rituals, they were sanctuaries carved out from the chaos of a rapidly changing world. Back in the 18th century, the world was in turmoil: wars, slavery, social inequality. The Quakers were often at the center of controversy because they refused to conform to the violence and injustice accepted by many. Their silence was a form of protest, a meditation on conscience, and a grounding force. And through it all, they walked, resolute, calm, unyielding. You imagine walking beside them, feeling the weight of their convictions settling around you like a cloak. They believed that true healing, both personal and social, came from listening deeply, not only to the voice within, but to the voices of the oppressed, the silenced, the forgotten. This leads you to one of the more surprising facts. The Quakers were among the earliest advocates for the abolition of slavery in America and England. At a time when slave trading was a lucrative business, their silent, steadfast opposition stood out like a beacon. It wasn't just words, it was action born from deep reflection. You consider the paradox here: silence as power. In a world obsessed with noise and spectacle, these people chose to resist through quietude. Historians still argue whether their peaceful methods were more effective than violent uprisings, but few dispute the profound impact their principles had on social reforms. As you walk on, you feel a strange sense of timelessness. The act of walking quietly after dinner, a simple habit, becomes a ritual for healing, not only for the mind, but for society. It's a reminder that sometimes stepping back and listening can be the most radical thing you do. Your mind wanders to modern life, where every moment seems saturated with noise: social media pings, news alerts, the constant barrage of opinions. You wonder if adopting a fraction of that Quaker silence could be a balm for today's overstimulated minds. By now, the sun begins to dip toward the horizon, casting longer shadows and bathing the world in golden hues. You slow your pace, feeling the day's warmth fading, the calmness deepening. The silent walk is ending, but its lessons ripple through you. How presence and patience can foster healing in ways shouting never could. And so you step forward, not just on a path through the countryside, but on a journey inward and outward. A journey toward peace, toward understanding, toward change that begins quietly but echoes loudly. Here is your passage exactly as written, with no changes. You feel the air cooling as twilight settles gently over the landscape, the soft hues of purple and pink painting the sky. Your footsteps are lighter now, the rhythm slower, as if even the earth itself is preparing to rest. It's a moment that invites you to reflect on the journey, the stillness, the strange comfort found in quiet footsteps. The Quaker silent walk after dinner was more than a mere custom. It was a passage, a way to move from the bustle of daily concerns into a space of calm contemplation. Imagine how, in an age without smartphones, without constant distractions, this simple practice shaped their evenings and indeed their lives. They believed that healing required presence, the full, undistracted attention to the moment and to each other. Walking in silence side by side was a way of honoring the shared human experience without the interference of words. It allowed wounds to breathe, frustrations to settle, and hope to quietly take root. One quirky fact: some Quaker communities would walk for miles in silence, no matter the weather, sharing no words but a profound sense of companionship. These walks sometimes lasted hours, winding through forests or along country lanes. You might think, silent walks for hours? You probably wouldn't survive that without your playlist. Yet, for them, the quiet was a source of strength. Historians still debate how much these silent practices influenced broader social movements, whether the discipline of silence translated into their political activism or their role as peacemakers. What is clear is that their peaceful protests and personal rituals fed each other, creating a cycle of resilience. As you near the end of this journey, you carry with you a gentle reminder. Sometimes, healing and strength come not from speaking out loud, but from listening to ourselves, to others, and to the quiet pulse of the world around us. The world today is noisier than ever, yet you see how the Quaker practice of silent walking can still speak volumes. It calls on us to slow down, to breathe deeply, and to find healing in moments of quiet presence. Now, as the night wraps its cool arms around you, you let go of the day's worries. The silence isn't empty. It's full of peace, of possibility, and of gentle healing. The night deepens and your breathing slows, softening into a calm rhythm that echoes the stillness around you. Let your thoughts drift gently, like leaves floating on a quiet stream, carrying away the noise and tension of the day. You are safe, held by the quiet wisdom of those who walked before you, their footsteps a gentle lullaby in the dark. Healing is a slow unfolding, a patient whisper within. So rest now, wrapped in calm and silence, until the morning light calls you gently back to the world. Sweet dreams. Thank you for being here. If this brought you peace, consider subscribing. Until next time, be kind to yourself.